Well, good morning, everybody. It's so good to see all of you here today. It is great to be back. Before I get into the message today, I just want to, I talk to you guys a lot about how incredible our team is here at the church. Last Sunday, whenever I called Daniel on Saturday night and said, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to be there on Sunday. And then I called him on Sunday morning and was like, dude, there's just no way I can do it. And he just immediately said, I got it. Don't worry about it. That's an incredible thing that I am just so grateful for the team that we have. And so I just wanted to publicly thank the team that we have. It means the world to me. So, but right now I'm going to pray, and then we'll dive into things. Jesus, thank you so much for today and just this opportunity to be in this place. God, I am so thankful to be here. And I just pray that you will do incredible things, that you will prepare our hearts to hear the message that you have for us today. May my heart be one with your heart. May my words be one with your words. May my mind be one with your mind, with your heart and your words and your mind obviously prevailing over mine. Jesus, I need you and I love you. In your name we pray. Amen. So today we are in the final week of our series entitled Overflow, and this whole idea of overflow kind of started with our Vision Sunday in December of last year, and kind of just ties with this umbrella value that we have as a church, that we want every single person who calls LeClaire Christian Church their home to experience a transformational relationship with Jesus. In other words, we want all of us to live from the overflow of what it is that Jesus is doing in our lives. So that the way that we think, the way that we talk, the way that we act, the way that we see the world, the way that we respond to the world has all been transformed by what it is that Jesus is doing in us and through us. And so to kick off this series, we talked about how this overflow begins in the heart. It all begins in the heart, and that every single one of us are living from the overflow of what's in our heart, whether that is good or bad or beautiful or hideous. All of us are living from the overflow that is in our heart. And then the next week we talked about how we want this overflow to impact our actions, the things that we do, the ways that we serve, and even the way that we respond to the needs that are presented to us. And during that message, we let you guys know about a handful of things that we need as a church, a handful of ministry opportunities that we have as a church. And over the course of that week, more than 25 of you signed up to get involved in serving, which is absolutely incredible. And then last week, Daniel talked about this idea that overflow needs community, that we cannot live a life of overflow alone. And we talked about how we have a goal as a church this year, that currently we have around 37% of our people who are involved in classes or groups or something like that. And our goal this year is to see that to go from 37% up to at least 45%, because we truly believe that you cannot live the life that Jesus desires for you to live alone. It was never meant to be that way. And so over the course of this last couple of weeks, we've had 10 new people sign up for groups and classes and things like that. So that's a start. But there's still a lot more of us that are still trying to live this life alone. And then today, as we close out the series, we're going to talk about how living a life of overflow leads to a life of faithfulness with our finances and leads to a life of generosity. Aren't you glad you came today? This past month, I started my 8th year here at LeClaire, which is incredible that you guys have put up with me that long. But over that time, I've never preached a full message on giving or generosity or money. I've never done a full series on giving or generosity or money. And there are a few reasons for that. One reason would be, much like if some of you were around last summer, we did a series on marriage. Whenever we kicked off the series on marriage, I said that there's just something in me that feels like that a pastor needs to have a certain amount of relational equity built up before they start talking about certain topics. And I think that for me, finances has kind of fallen into that I feel like that there's a certain amount of relational equity and trust that you guys need to have in me and that we need to have in one another before we talk about these topics. And maybe that's wrong thinking, but that's been part of my thinking. Another reason why I haven't done a full message or series on this is because I know in the world today that there is a lot of distrust in the church, that there is a lot of distrust in people who do what I do. And I know that every week we have guests that show up here, and if you're a guest here today, thank you so much for coming. Please come back next week because we're starting a brand new sermon series that I cannot wait to get started. But I've never wanted the first experience that somebody has with our church, the first message that somebody hears from our church, to be about money. And then finally, the last reason that I haven't talked about it is that we just really haven't needed to talk about it. At churches I've been at in the past, there's been pressure from the leadership to say, we need you to preach on tithing. We need you to preach on giving. But the reason that there was pressure for me to preach on tithing and to preach on giving was because we needed more tithes and we needed more money. Well, here we've been so blessed that we've been able to make budget, we've been able to pay our bills, and we've even been able to give away a lot of money. And so I believe that all of those reasons make sense as to why I have not broached this topic quite yet. However, over the past year or so, I've become more and more convicted that I am possibly doing a disservice, not necessarily to LeClaire Christian Church, but to each and every one of us as individual followers of Jesus by not talking about money and giving and generosity. And here's why. We are called to make Jesus in His ways first in each and every area of our lives. And we are called to live generously, not solely for the need of meeting a budget or to pay some bills, but we are called to live generously as part of a lifestyle of worship, to show that God is our ultimate provider, and so we can be faithful stewards with all that He has entrusted to us. So let me put it this way. We cannot live the life that Jesus desires for us to live without living generously. And this looks different for each and every person in each and every family. I think that we all would agree that this is true. Money has the ability to take a very unhealthy place in each of our lives if we allow it. We know how badly we need it, which means that we can easily base our values and our lives and our priorities around it. We know that it is easy to come into a place like this and to say, Jesus, I trust you. Jesus, I trust you with my life. Jesus, I trust you with my family. Jesus, I trust you with my health. Jesus, I trust you to forgive my sins. But one of the toughest areas for me personally is to say, Jesus, I trust you with my money. And I believe that that's the reason that Jesus talked about money, the amount that He did. You all have probably heard this at some point in time, that whenever it comes to the topics that Jesus talked about the most, the first one is the kingdom of heaven. That's what He talked about more than anything else. If you want to break it down into this, the next topic that He talked about more than anything else is the importance of faith. So that would have been the second thing. But the one that comes after faith is money. More than sin, more than hell, He talked about money. He talked about the importance of storing up our treasures in heaven as opposed to storing them up here on earth. He talked about the importance of using what we have to bless others. He talked about the importance of seeing our Father in heaven as our ultimate provider. And And he gave many warnings about money, like the warning that he gave to the rich fool in Luke chapter 12, where he said, "Watch out and be on your guard and stand against all kinds of greed." Why? It's like he's saying, don't forget that life does not consist in abundance of possessions. In the Sermon on the Mount, he talked about money a couple of different times, and probably the most famous thing that he said is no one can serve two masters. And there are any number of directions that Jesus could have gone whenever he said no one can serve two masters, because that's true of anything and everything. But here's the direction that Jesus decided to go in the Sermon on the Mount. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Paul to Timothy said something kind of similar. He put it like this: the love of money, and I want to emphasize that, the love of money is the root of all evil. And one of my favorite parables is found in Matthew chapter 25, and I preach this parable a lot here at LeClaire, but typically whenever we talk about it in the terms of general stewardship, like every area of your life is a stewardship, and it is certainly true in that context. But the original context of the parable revolves around money. And I know that it is so easy for us to sit here and to think, well, if this was different or if that was different, if I could pay this off or if I could get this raise, if this was different or if that was different, then I would be generous. But stewardship isn't about our circumstances. Stewardship is always all about faithfulness. And so in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14, there's this man who represents Jesus in the story, and he goes away for a long, long time, and he calls 3 of his servants to him, and to the first servant he comes, and he gives him 5 bags of gold. To the second he comes and he gives him 2 bags of gold. To the final one he comes and he gives him 1 bag of gold. The scholars believe that these bags of gold were extremely, extremely valuable, that they were called talents. They're called, which was basically just a weighted form of currency. And each talent, each bag of gold would have been worth around 20 years worth of a common day laborer's wage. And so one guy got about 100 years worth of income, one guy got about 40 years of income, and one guy got about 20. And then the guy who received the 5 bags of gold, he went off and he immediately put that money to work, and he ended up gaining 5 more bags of gold. The one who gained the 2 bags of gold, he went and put that money to work, and he gained 2 more bags of gold. And the one who got the 1 bag of gold, he went to his backyard, he dug a deep hole, and he buried the money in the ground because he was terrified to screw things up. And then it says this in verse 19, that after a long time, the master of those servants, he returned to settle accounts with them. And the man who had received the 5 bags of gold, he brought his other 5 back with him. "Master," he said, and these words are so important, "you entrusted me. You entrusted me in your life." Jesus has entrusted whatever you have to you. Another way to say that is, you have what you have because Jesus decided that you would have what you have. Jesus entrusted it to you. You entrusted it to me. It's not mine, it's yours. But you've allowed me to watch over it. You entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained you 5 more. You take this idea of entrustment and you apply it into every area of your life. My time, it is not mine, but it is yours, but you have entrusted it to me. My job, it is not mine, but it is yours, but you have entrusted it to me. My relationships and my friendships, they are not mine, they are yours, but you have entrusted them to me. My family, it is not mine, but it is yours, but you have entrusted it to me. My gifts and my talents and my abilities, they are not mine, but they are yours, but you have entrusted them to me. My finances, they are not mine, but they are yours, and you have entrusted them to me. So what will I do with what has been entrusted to me? His master replied, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, so I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness." You look at this and you have to ask the question, why is he good? Why is this servant good? The reason this servant is good is simply because this servant has been faithful with what has been entrusted to him. In verse 22, the man with the 2 bags of gold, he came and said, "Master, you entrusted me. It was not mine, it was yours, but you allowed me to watch over. You entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained you 2 more. And his master replied, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You are good because you were faithful. You have been faithful with a few things, so I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness." Then the man who had received the one bag of gold, he came and he said, "Master, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown seed and have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed." And immediately the one who had not been faithful with what God had entrusted to him, immediately whenever he was called to account, immediately he went into excuse-making mode, which is exactly what the majority of us do whenever we are caught not being good stewards with what has been entrusted to us. He continued, he said, so I was afraid because you were this hard man, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here it is, all dirty and filthy, but here it is. Here's what belongs to you. And if we're willing to be honest here today, and I know one of the hardest things for us to be honest about is money. But if we're willing to be honest, this is where so many of us land so often. Whenever it comes to our finances, it's so easy for us to live in this scarcity mentality, like, will God really provide? Will He really come through? It's so easy for us to live our lives believing that what we have is ours. That it belongs to us and it's not something that has been entrusted to us. And so we take what God has entrusted to us and we hide it and we bury it and we just hope that no one will ever notice. But the master, his reply was, "You wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. You wicked and lazy servant." Why was he wicked? Why was he lazy? Because he was not faithful with what God has entrusted to him. This life is a stewardship, church. And we all will be held accountable for what has been entrusted to us. So real quick, I just want to give you 3 truths about stewardship that we learn from this parable. The first one is that good servants are good because of their effort, not because of their talent. They are good because they were faithful with what God had entrusted to them. The second one is, I just said it, we will be held accountable for what God entrusts to us. But the third one, and probably the biggest one in this story, is that we are all given different starting points. This is why I tell you that what a life of generosity looks different for each and every one of us in this room and each and every family in this room. We all are given different starting points. $100 to somebody may be the biggest sacrifice that they could possibly give. $100 to somebody else is not even a drop in the bucket. We all are given different starting points. We have different backgrounds and different environments and different influences and different paychecks. Jesus gave different amounts to each of his servants. One had 5, one had 2, one had 1. He gave different amounts, but listen, he expected the exact same faithfulness. And so the question is, will we be faithful with what God has entrusted to us? Right now, I'm going to ask Daniel to come up here, because we've talked a lot over the course of this series, and even if you go back to Vision Night last December, or Vision Sunday last December, we talked about a lot of the goals that we have. We talked about the discipleship goals with wanting to get more people involved in groups. We talked about a parking lot that we have a quote now on a parking lot that we need to do. We talked about adding another staff member. We've talked about a lot of our goals, but right now I just want Daniel to kind of go through some of the goals that we have for each of you whenever it comes to giving and generosity.
I'm going to sit in the chair because there's one up here. Hearing Andy speak and talk about that, I hope we talked this week, one of the most difficult things about talking about money is just trying to convey our heart in all of this. And I thought he did an incredible job. And I hope that you hear that. There's a passage in Galatians 4 where Paul is talking to the church in Galatia, and he's saying, "I remember the pains of childbirth so that Christ is formed in you." And truly that is our desire, that Christ is formed in you in all areas of your life, including finances, which is a big area of our lives. I was reading through Revelation this week, just finishing up, going through that. And near the end, in chapter 21, we see this vision, this picture of this new Jerusalem. It's this city that all of God's people will one day live in when evil is done away with and Satan is done away with. And there was just one detail that stuck out to me. Maybe it was because I knew we were going to be talking about this. But there's this image in verses 24 through 26 of the kings of the earth and the nations coming and bringing their wealth and their splendor before the Lord. And I was just reminded that even when all is said and done, we will continue to worship God through giving Him and sacrificing to Him in this way. I believe that is a part of who we are meant to be. God designed us and desires us to be generous people. So we see that at the very end. We also saw at the very beginning. I've always wondered, we have the story of Adam and Eve walking intimately with God in the garden. Then the fall happens. And then in Genesis chapter 4, we have the story of Cain and Abel. And you're maybe familiar with the story. They both give these offerings to God, and God is pleased with Abel's but not Cain's. And there's a truth there just about obedience. But I've always wondered, how did Cain and Abel know that it was normative to offer things to God? How did they know that? God didn't teach that specifically anywhere that we know about. Maybe He did, and I just don't know. But I can't help but think that was something perhaps that Adam and Eve had passed on to their sons, that those who walked faithfully with God were teaching them, this is what we do as we worship God. And of course, people forgot all about that. And that's why when God was helping us recapture what it means to truly be human, what it means to be who He created us to be, He began to form this nation of Israel to ultimately bring His Son, but He also taught them ways of living that were in line with who we were created to be. And one of the things He taught them was this idea of a tithe, that this was a part of worshiping God. It was a way to say that, God, you come first in our lives. You are primary in our lives. Now, I don't believe that you and I are under the old covenant anymore. We're under a new covenant through Jesus, that our righteousness comes because of His sacrifice on the cross, not by some law. I don't believe that we have to legalistically follow giving 10%. However, I do still believe that tithing is an incredible generosity principle that has eternal principles for you and I today. And that's something that as we talk about generosity, as we talk about this idea of overflow, that we want to offer a challenge for you, just as we have these other few weeks in areas that we've talked about, and I'll explain that a little bit more in just a little bit. But for those of you who maybe don't even know what a tithe is, it's this idea of giving 10% of all you have to God. And I think there are some principles behind it that are important for us to remember. I think one, is a way of saying, God, you come first in my life. For those that have crops and livestock, they would take their very first 10% to say, God, this goes to you because you're number one. I think secondly, it's an antidote to greed. So often, as Andy said, Jesus talks about giving. He gives parables about giving, and I think a lot of that is because money has a unique way of grabbing hold of our hearts more so than other things can. And one of the best ways, and one of the best antidotes to that is to give it away. I think tithing also teaches this idea of proportion. That all of us maybe give different gifts, but we're all sacrificing the same. I think that's a powerful principle. And so as we go along here and as we extend kind of this challenge, I do want to remind you that here at LeClaire, after we kind of understand this is a part of who we are, that we've been called to be generous people, I think we live in a time and a place that God allows whatever we collect to be used to further His kingdom. And I believe that He uses the local church to do that the local church is the hope for the rest of the world. And often some of the things we do takes money. It takes financial contributions. As Andy shared last week, we shared one of our big goals for this year is in the realm of discipleship. We want to grow in our classes and Bible studies and life groups from 37% to 45%, and we're continuing to do that. But one of our hopes this year is potentially hire somebody to help us in that realm, and that, of course, comes at a cost. Something else that he mentioned at Vision Sunday is we want to, by the end of this year, have more spaces available in our parking lot. I think you heard him share that at Vision Sunday. And, not every single Sunday our parking lot is full, but there are some Sundays now that whenever we meet together, it is. And we've had people that are out there on a weekly basis that as people drive on campus, they have told us they'll drive around and not see a spot and then they'll leave. And the last thing we want is that to be an obstacle to keeping people from coming and participating in worship each and every Sunday. But that comes at a cost. And there may be a day that we come to you once we kind of know what our final plans are. Our elders are working diligently to figure that out. We're already seeing doors open that we didn't think possible of some new spaces. But right now, we want to encourage you to help cultivate that ground as best as possible for that time. And it's not just the parking lot. We're going to have other things as we continue to grow and needs that come about. And this is an opportunity to partner with God in advancing his kingdom right here through LeClaire. So that leads to our third goal for 2024. First was 37% to 45%, and then a new parking lot. And then this last one has to do with giving. And it is the idea that in 2024, we would love to add 24 new consistent givers to help us with all of those other things. Last August, we did a little bit of a survey. One of our administrative assistants helped us with this. And just to kind of get a gauge of what is the temperature at LeClaire and kind of looking at all of our members and all of our longtime regular attenders, what are some of the giving patterns? And one of the things that we found out was that of all of our members and regular attenders, we have about 42% that give consistently. And we were kind of shocked by that number, honestly. We thought it'd be a little bit higher, and kind of comparing churches to churches, it usually is. And so that made us kind of think about, maybe we have missed something by not talking about this more often, because we really haven't had to, and we're grateful to God for that. But we want to do what we feel called to do and talk about the things that the Bible talks about, and giving is one of those things. And so that's why our hope in 2024, one of those things, we'd love to see 24 new consistent givers in 2024. And perhaps today, maybe that's you. I don't know. But today, in the pew in front of you, there are some cards, and you probably got some cards as you came in this morning. And I really do just want to encourage you to take this with you today, and over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, to really pray through it, and just ask God if there are any next steps in this area that he's calling you to. Maybe you're here today, and maybe you're someone that, I've never, ever given before. This is a new concept for me. And maybe as you hear, this is the reality of who God's people are. When we give, we are practicing who we are always going to be from here until eternity. And maybe that's you. But maybe this idea of giving a tithe is overwhelming, and there's no way you can see that. And I just want to encourage you, start somewhere. Maybe it's giving $10, $20 every single month, just something consistent to get in the habit of being generous. Maybe that's you, so maybe that's that first one. Or maybe you've given consistently for a little while, and maybe it's a call to give more. Maybe that you've gotten kind of accustomed to doing that, and it's not really a sacrifice much anymore. So maybe it's that second one there. Or maybe you've never given this a tithe before, this idea of a tithe, and seeing that it's a giving principle. Maybe that's a next step for you. Or lastly, maybe you tithe regularly, and it's an opportunity to say, you know what, I've done that for many, many years, and now I want to push that a little more and give a little more. I don't know what it may be for you, and honestly, this is really just something between you and God to decide. It's just a chance for you to make a commitment. And so I just want to encourage you over the next several weeks to take a moment to think about that, to pray through that. And then we do ask that you bring it back and drop it in, just so that we can kind of see and celebrate whatever comes from it. You can just drop them in those black boxes at the back of our auditorium. But we're going to continue to speak to this over the next several weeks and encourage you as we go on in this goal of ours for this year. But we appreciate you so much, as always, just for your generosity, and it's our goal that Christ is formed in us in all areas of our life. So I'm going to ask Andy to come back out here, and he's going to close things up for us.
The last thing that I want is for any semblance of human guilt to be going that way today. I know how hard this is. I think back into my 20s, and if I had a chance to meet 20 to 25-year-old Andy Turner, I honestly think the first thing I would do is go punch him in the throat. Bigger idiot than anybody you could ever imagine. Went through some stuff in my early 20s where I ended up basically running away from home. And whenever I ran away from home, I ran into the ministry. It's the only thing that I thought I might be able to do. And so I've been doing full-time ministry since I was 20 years old. And I don't know if you guys know this about churches, but if they're hiring a 20-year-old youth minister at the time, there wasn't much of a pay package that really came with it. But I didn't care. I had a guy in my church who convinced me while I was making maybe $20,000 or $22,000 a year that I could afford a $24,000 truck. So I went and I bought it. You would have thought that, whenever 6 banks said, no, we're not giving him that money, that would have been a sign to me to maybe stick with the car I could afford. But no, I didn't. I ended up going and my wife and I, we bought our first house for $36,000 in Cherryville, Kansas. And we went through all kinds of pain there in Cherryville and a lot of hard times. And at the end of the hard times, we ended up going to a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the cheapest rent that we could find in Charlotte, North Carolina was around $1,300. And so I wasn't able to keep up with the payments back on the house in Cherryville, and there wasn't a booming housing market in Cherryville, Kansas for some reason, and so I ended up losing that house in foreclosure. And I remember during that time while my wife and I were living in Charlotte, we had no heat in our house. We couldn't afford to pay the deposit to turn it on. And we were far too prideful to let anybody know. One day, somebody in our church found out, and it was a weekend, and they came and they brought us an electric blanket. And then they went and paid the deposit for us. I mean, financially, there was no way to make my salary go as far as it needed to go. My wife had a job, but even with that, it wasn't enough. And I remember one day, Heather and I, we were driving to the high school that our church met at. And Heather, she looked at me and she said, Andy, we have to start tithing. I had asked a pastor at one of my previous churches, please hold me accountable to tithing. I know I want to do it, but I'm just not. I mean, I'm totally the guy that if I have $10, $15 left over at the end of the week, maybe I'll give some of that. And I was in ministry. And my wife, she said, Andy, we have to start tithing. And I looked at her and said, you are absolutely insane. But I knew she was right. And so that moment, we began to tithe. Now, it has not always been easy since that point in our lives. But I can promise you, God has always provided. Always provided. I remember the Sunday that she said that because there was a guy who came up to me in the hallway of the school in between services, and he said, hey, Andy, I just want to thank you for being here. And he shook my hand, and in his hand was a $100 bill. And then the next week he came and he shook my hand and he had more money in his hand, and I became like Pavlov's dog, y'all. Like anytime I saw that guy coming, it's like, you want to shake hands, buddy? But it blew me away. We did not have money to pay our bills, but our bills still got paid. There's been times whenever we've had to to sell things to make ends meet. But the bills have always got paid. We've always had food on our table. We've always had a roof over our head. So I say all of this not like, I know this is easy, and if you're not, shame on. I've been there. I've been there, and Malachi chapter 2, God says, test me in this. Try me. And I've tested God. And He's proven again and again and again that He can do more with my 90% than I could ever do with my whole 100. It's an amazing thing to be able to see God just continually act and act and act and act and act. And I've still been an idiot many times. But God continues to act and act and act and act. And the further I get into this whole thing, the more convinced I become that our gifts and our generosity are truly a key piece of our discipleship. And saying, God, I trust you. We have a lot of big dreams here at the church. We believe God wants to do a lot of big things. And you all have been so incredibly faithful in giving and in already partnering in that. And it's been an incredible 7 full years, and I'm so excited for this 8th year. But there's still tens of thousands of people outside these doors who need to know about Jesus, and I want to be used by God to reach as many of them as we possibly can. So can we come together and do just that? To be good stewards of all that God has entrusted to us. Your gifts, your talents, your abilities, your life, your family, your job, your relationships, your friendships, your home, your finances. Can we be faithful with what God has entrusted to us? Right now, I'm going to pray. And after I pray, I'm going to ask that if you would like to, please go ahead and come on up. If there's something that's going on in your life today, Daniel and I will be up here, and we'd love nothing more than to be able to pray with you. If you have a decision to make, if you have questions about our church, if you just need to tell us, shame on you for, I don't know, whatever you, we'll be up here, and we'd love to be able to talk with you, to be able to pray with you this morning. So Father in heaven, I thank you for today, and I thank you for the opportunity we have to be in this place, to be able to call on your name, to be able to see you do the things that only you can do. Jesus, we are so grateful for the way that you have provided again and again and again. And so, Father, I pray today that your glory will be seen, that your Spirit will be felt, that you will move in us and through us, and that you will use us to do great things in this community and in this world, to point people to you. Jesus, we love you. In your name we pray. Amen. Please go ahead and stand and come as we sing.